Welcome to Speaking of Spirituality, a podcast to share about the path of spiritual awakening. I'm your host, Amelia McLean, and I am so excited to be showcasing some inspiring stories and exploring some interesting topics, all under the umbrella of spirituality. So without further ado, let's dive right in. I'd love to hear what your spiritual awakening journey looked like when you think about spiritual awakening in your lifetime. What does that mean for you?
I have never had anyone ask me this question. And so when you mentioned that that's like what you're asking people, I got really excited about it because I was like, wow, I've never actually thought about that. Like I've always been like, yeah, I'm on a spiritual journey. But, in terms of actually breaking it down and being like, well, what actually were the parts of that journey and when did they happen and what catalyzed that? I'd never really thought about it before. So thank you for just like even for me, right? Regardless of whether or not this is beneficial or interesting to anybody else, I feel like it's been a cool practice for me to begin to think about. So here's what I'd say. I do feel like I came into this world having a desire for a deeper understanding or a connection to something greater, but it wasn't available to me in my family, in my childhood growing up. My mom, I don't know if she still feels this way, but she was kind of a self-proclaimed atheist when I was growing up. My father's Greek, so he was Greek Orthodox by culture, but he also is pretty atheist leaning. So we went to Greek church, but it really wasn't meant to be like a spiritual thing. It was more of a social thing. It was like, get really dressed up. We might find you a Greek husband, kind of a vibe. And I remember sitting in Greek church as a very young girl and being like, none of this is familiar, reflects anything with that I internally feel. It doesn't resonate with me in any way. I felt like the churches were beautiful and the Greek hymns were lovely and the smell of the myrrh and frankincense was nice, but there was nothing that really felt transcendental or something about it to me. And I just remember asking a lot as a kid, what happens when we die? And I asked a lot of my dad's friends. My parents owned a hair salon. And so I kind of hung out a lot there and I was always hanging out with all their employees. So I just remember, I have this very vivid memory of a conversation with several of my dad's employees. And I must have been 6 or 7. And I was like, what happens when we die? And I was getting all of these really just unsatisfying answers, So I just feel like throughout my life, there has just been this yearning that wasn't really met with anything. And I don't feel like actually anybody else in my family, my immediate family at least, had that same need. So then kind of fast forward, it's time to go to college and decide what we're going to be when we grow up, right? And figure that out. And I was really stuck. I spent a lot of my teenage years in quite a funk and quite a depression. And I was heavily medicated. I was put on antidepressants at a pretty young age. And a lot of that, as I look back, was oh, I was actually really tuned in and tapped into something. And because of that, I was in grieving because it's wow, the whole world and everything is so out of alignment, But as a young person, I really didn't know how to, I wasn't in a position of authority to talk about it in that way. I didn't have a context to understand it. So they were like, wow, you need help, So I feel like even those kinds of things are such an important, I think, part of the trajectory. I needed to be medicated, numbed out. I needed to have that experience to know that that's being dead and not really being alive. And also how much that actually really disconnects you from your spirit and disconnects you from experiencing the range of emotion that allows us to feel tapped into something bigger than ourselves. Most people find God through pain and suffering and but you have to go into the darkness of it. You have to have the dark night of the soul and you can't kind of numb your way out of it. So, but I did that for a while. I was in and out of the numbness of all of that, but it was interesting because it was time to go to college. It was time to figure out what we were going to do. And I was really stuck where I was like, I can't see a purpose in moving forward in my life unless I know why the fuck I'm doing this. You know what I mean? Why do I need to go to college? Why do I need to get a job? Why does any of this matter if we're just spinning on a ball in space for no freaking reason? Because I hadn't found anything that really satisfied me spiritually, I just didn't see a point to anything anymore. So I was kind of in this nihilistic period. And so it was I don't really want to move forward in any way until I can find some firm spiritual foundation that I can then build my life on. But you're asking me to build my life on air, on nothing, on something that is just doesn't feel fulfilling to me. So when I actually ended up going to college, I was like, I'm just going to study philosophy. I started taking I was taking like mythology and philosophy. I was taking things that were just like heady and was really interesting to me. But when I found philosophy, I was like, this is it. I was like, whoa, I need to ask these questions and of myself, of the universe. I need to like answer these questions. And if I have satisfactory answers to this, then I can move forward. Then I can see a reason to like get a job, get married, have a life, do any of it, you know? And so, yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I feel like other people studied philosophy kind of had similar things maybe, but it was like, there was a lot of pain and a lot of unmet yearning. And until I could satiate that part of me, it just felt like there was going to be no way forward. And so it wasn't like I was becoming a philosophy student because I was going to like teach philosophy, you know, or be a lawyer or whatever people like study philosophy for. It was just like, I like actually have to do this, you know? So that was also a part of it. Concurrently, like at the same time as all of this though, I started dating a guy senior year of high school who was really into mushrooms. He was like born in the wrong generation though, because he was like a big deadhead. He just basically wanted to trip mushrooms like all the time and just like watch Grateful Dead videos, you know. But I like had never like I was starting to like smoke some herb around that time, and it was actually the beginning of smoking weed that made me start really questioning if I wanted to be on these medications I was on. So I was really grateful kind of for that. But it was like my foray into psychedelics. And so I just began tripping with him, you know, just the two of us, like every weekend, like a lot, you know, and it became like a very regular part of our relationship actually. And I felt safe enough with this partner to, you know, really explore that world. And I felt like I wasn't doing it alone. I felt like he was my partner. We're journeying through this territory together, you know. And I think probably the thing I will credit my spiritual growth with more than anything was that. Now, if I feel like if I had just done psychedelics and didn't also study metaphysics and like kind of do more of that intellectual experiencing, like that feels balanced to me. Like it feels like I went through this journey that was both intellectual to find deeper meaning, but also experiential and creative and outside of my head, you know? But I don't think I would have really started on that journey without psychedelics personally. I don't know if that's necessarily true for everybody, but I feel like I didn't realize how much I was very limited in my understanding of reality because of the perspective that I had been created kind of in my mind, the box in my head. And when I found myself outside of that, it was like a whole world opened up. And after I did mushrooms for, I don't know how many times I did, but it was like at that time period, it really was pretty frequently because I was like, I want to understand this terrain. I want to know what's going on. Like I'm feeling so tuned in. I'm feeling so connected to nature. I'm feeling oneness with everything. And I had these like intellectual understandings about what that was, but I was actually getting to embody it and really feel it in a lived way. That's when I was like, okay, I'm done with like pharmaceuticals. And I remember the day I went to my therapist when I was 17. So I was still a minor. And she was like, you know, I guess they were starting to like assume that I was taking drugs, you know. It's pretty, you know, it's like all of a sudden I'm like dressing different. I stopped like shaving my armpits, you know, it's all the obvious stuff you would expect from a teenager that went like entered into that, you know, went through my hippie era. But like I think I just said to her, like, hey, I found something that actually like works better for me. And it wasn't like I need to take this forever kind of a feeling. It was like, I don't want to be numb because I actually now can express and feel something even greater and even bigger. And what it did was it created a context for me. Like I could really truly feel that there was purpose, that there was love, that there was magic in the world. Like it re-enchanted life for me. And I don't know that I lived in an enchanted world, you know, after a young age. I had a pretty rough family situation growing up. And I'm the oldest. So it was a lot of like, you got to grow up. So like, it was like that magic that you feel as a child, I feel like ended kind of early for me. And then discovering psychedelics brought me back to a place of enchantment. And I was like, wow, magic is real. Like we are magic. Like everything is magic. And it was both a huge welcome relief, but it was also like this responsibility. Like, okay, I just am waking up to something that a lot of other people don't see. And I'm still a young kid at this point, but I'm looking at my parents and I'm looking at, the authority figures in my life. And I'm like, they're just not getting it, like, and it did, just like I think anybody on a spiritual journey, all of a sudden, maybe the people you were around or the type of influences you had are no longer resonating with who you are becoming. And so that was also the time for me to actually really branch out and start to find like my tribe, my people, because I wanted to talk about like what we're discovering together, and I love that about those like early 20s years, because I like lived in a house with a bunch of my guy friends, and later we were exploring with other psychedelics and pathogens, and that was a really cool and very important time in my life. Like, I don't know if other people are like, oh, drugs, I did that, it was bad or whatever. Like, I don't feel that way. It's not like how I live my life now. But I feel like it was such an important developmental stage to have that. And in a way, it kind of reminds me of like, how the Amish like send their kids off at a certain age to like go and experience the world and like decide if they want to do that or come back or whatever, it was like that. It was like I had to go experience like all of like the edges of my consciousness and like go out into the vastness and feel all those things so that I could come back like bearing these gifts and then like really live my life from that place. So that was a big part of, I think, like the introduction to it. I also, backing up a little bit, as a teenager, I felt very disempowered because of my upbringing. And I kind of found this sense of being able to feel connected to power through the idea of like magic and witchcraft. And so even before all these psychedelic experiences, like as a young girl, I was like really interested in like ESP and doing spells. And I feel like it's a thing. It's also a thing I think a lot of young girls go through, but I was definitely like more interested in it than most people. And I'm an avid reader. So, and my parents were not like, don't read that stuff. Like nobody was telling me what I couldn't read. So, I was able to like access a lot. And so I started getting into like astrology, which has become a big part of my life, in my teen years and all these other things. And I thought that was really cool too, because in a way I'm grateful now that I didn't have a family that impressed a specific spiritual tradition on me or a certain religion, because they didn't actually care if I was like bringing home books on like magic or astrology. Like they were just like, whatever, let her read what she wants, but it was cool because I feel like I did really expose myself to a lot of different, tarot. I got really into tarot in high school. Like a friend of mine had this beautiful deck, and I was like, oh, this is exciting. Something about that mystical dimension it's just always resonated with me, and I just kept wanting to follow that. Yeah, I don't know. That's where it started. I'm like, there's more, but that's the most about where I think that journey really began.
And what about the moon circles? What part did that play for you in the development of your spirit?
That's a good question. Thank you for bringing that up too. I was just going to skip over that all of a sudden. Yeah, so it's interesting. At the time when I needed it most, right? I'm in middle school. Middle school, I feel like is miserable for most people, but like, it was really tough for me. My parents were divorcing. My horse had just died. I was on all these drugs, like I was saying, and I was just really I didn't have like a lot of good relations. I had a couple of really close girlfriends, but I had a lot of like bullying happening at school. And so it was in a really, really dark way. And of course my period comes like right at that time. Right. And I didn't have nobody was talking to me about the period being something sacred. I wasn't like, my family specifically wasn't like shamey about it or like keep it private. I actually felt like I was celebrated in stepping into womanhood, but it also wasn't like they did anything about it necessarily, and to me, it just started to feel like this like annoyance where I was like, well, I can't go to the pool party now or whatever, but my best friend's mother And her parents are two people that I would also really credit with instilling a lot of like, just laying the foundation for what spirituality could look like in like someone's lived life. For me, they were both, uh, they found each other in recovery. They had lived some really crazy lives before they got together, so they were super real with me. They were like, hey, this is how it is. And they were always super open about like, oh, if you guys want to smoke weed, that's fine. Just do it here with us. We'll make sure you're fine and safe. I appreciated being held by people that were like really real. And her father was a yogi practitioner. He'd been a follower of, I don't know, I'm not going to remember the Swami's name now. But anyway, he was really deeply devout into his yogic practice. And her mother was always involved in these moon circles. And I kind of like knew something about it. And it was like cool. It sounded cool to me because it sounded witchy, and I was like, yeah, like I'm into that. So she was like, I'm going to, I told the group last month that I'm going to invite you guys this month because both of you have gotten your first bleed now. And so it felt like really cool. It was like, I don't know where we're going to go or what we're going to do. And I feel like, I don't know. I don't know if other people would have felt the same way as me, but when we got there, it was just my best friend and I were 13 at this point. It's a circle of women in a basement with candles and, beautiful altar, but they're all like grown women, their moms, their grandmothers, and they were so like, I actually have this very clear image of walking down the staircase into this room that's all candlelit and all these women smiling, like they were proud of me and they didn't even know me. You know what I mean? And I've got goosebumps just thinking about it. Cause it was, you have to remember, I think as a young girl, like the dynamics between women and girls can just be really like volatile and catty. And so to see sisterhood that was beyond age, generational, you know what I mean? And that like it was just about us connecting and in this space that was separate from men, which I also wasn't really, I hung out with girlfriends. We didn't have guys around, but it wasn't like this was like, oh, this is a space that is sort of like outside patriarchal conditioning, where there's no competition, there's no jealousy, it's just family, really. Yeah, that totally changed my life. And I would say that practice itself, even though I continued to have a really dark time for the rest of my like teen years, honestly, it was like the heartbeat of my life. It was every month that I could. I was there at the circle, learning from these women, understanding more about indigenous ways of the indigenous spiritual traditions that were connected to the earth, which really paired nicely with kind of what I've been reading about Wicca and paganism. I was like, oh, we're just returning back to how people did it back in the day. Before they were like these long myths and these long stories and this thou shall and shall not and all this stuff, because I wasn't really resonating with any of that. I was like, I want to feel connected to the earth. I want to feel connected to the things around me that I actually can see. I always felt like really, I lived in a very seasonal place. I lived in Virginia at the time. And so it was like we had summer and winter and fall, like all the way. And I felt within myself this like rebirth every year with the cycles. And so I really also appreciated that feminine spirituality was all about our cyclical nature. It was like, yeah, really, we celebrate the earth holidays, like harvests, and the solstices, and we let ourselves go within during the winter and we rebirth ourselves in spring. And then every month we're doing that too with the moon cycles. And like, it just all made sense to me, like deep in my bones, and nobody else was talking about that kind of stuff. And it definitely where I lived was more of a sort of conservative, but intellectual place. But that was too woo-woo at the time. Like now I'm sure that women would feel really comfortable there being like, yeah, I'm part of a women's circle. But at the time it was still super hush hush. You know what I mean? And I felt like I was part of this like secret society, me and my best friend, like getting to tap into this world. And yeah, I felt like I got true mentorship there from elders who had, who were living their spiritual lives, and I began to see that I could become a person that made spirituality a part of my life and who I was and how I showed up. Not this thing that's like, oh yeah, every Sunday you just go to church, or like, but it was actually something like, no, like this is my North Star. It's like from my spiritual center that I do all the things in my life. And that's what these women were doing, and that's what they embodied for me. And that was a relief to like see that there were people who, had a spiritual practice that resonated with me, but that was also practical. It was just like how they lived their life, not separate in some way. And also not for show. Because like I said, I feel like the way I understood religion up to that point, through my dad and the Greek church and everything, it felt very like, this is what we do because this is what we do, not because it was authentic to what people were really experiencing. And I also I started questioning authority very early. So I feel like for some people who were raised in a specific religious tradition, but break out of it eventually and have their spiritual awakening, it didn't take as long for me because I was sort of like, I don't think these people know what they're talking about. You know what I mean? Or I would see people who were supposedly very devout Christians or whatever, but I also knew that they were being unfaithful to their wives, that they had done bad things. And I was like, there was a part of me that was just like I was questioning this a lot. I was always trying to compute okay, these are adults. We're supposed to respect them. And supposedly they're like good people spiritually, or they, commit to practicing a certain religion. But from what I'm seeing, they're screwed up. And I don't know about that, I feel like a lot of people when I was young that were that way really didn't like me as a child. I'll give you an example. My aunt, this is my uncle by blood's wife. I used to spend a lot of time with them growing up and hang out with my cousin because he was a year older than me. And when I was an early teenager, it was around the time I was going to the moon hoop. It was around the time I'm looking into witchcraft or whatever. But she decides and tells my family that I am a servant of the devil. And I'm do dark magic. And she doesn't want me around my cousin or their family. And at that point, they cut us off. And I literally did not ever have a relationship with my cousin again. And they lived 20 minutes away, but it was, the story was that it was because of me. And now I'm wow, as I look back on it, I'm I think that it just made certain people really uncomfortable, that even as a young person, I was really looking, I could just see through the bullshit. And I wasn't really going to tolerate being respectful to someone just because they were older than me, but not actually deserving of that respect, And I saw kind of her as that way. And I don't recall many of our interactions because I was young, but I know that I probably talked to her that way, and it was ooh, this is uncomfortable, I'm not trying to be judged by this 9-year-old girl, 10-year-old girl or whatever. So yeah, that's kind of another thing is I definitely noticed that I could really push those buttons for people when I was younger. And I probably still can, but I think I've figured out how to maybe do it in a less rebellious and disruptive way. Maybe.
Yeah. Well, I definitely believe that we pick our families for a certain reason. You were in your family to be that black sheep, if you will, that different thinker, and to kind of start to, because even if your aunt shunned you or whatever you want to call it, and you were triggering her, that's a part of the spiritual awakening process, right? To be triggered by something and to think about, why is this so good for me,
Yeah. And I don't know if that was part of a journey for her or not, but as you say that, I'm remembering I had the same thing happen in my dance troupe, because I was a dancer. That was my whole life. I wanted to be a ballerina. That was my dream. So I was really into dance. And I remember traveling back from a dance competition in a car with a bunch of the other girls from dance. And it's such a weird thing, but I was we're driving through the winter in Virginia. And I said something I love the trees like this, because it was you could see really far, right? Because they weren't all covered with their foliage. I was I just love the trees like this when they're dead. And then all of a sudden there's this rumor Sabrina loves dead trees and she's a witch, And of course it doesn't help that my name's Sabrina, right? Already there's this whole witchy connotation with me, and I'm sure I was embodying it a lot. But so then all of a sudden, girls at my dance studio and their moms were kind of sketched about me being engaged and hanging out and going to the sleepovers and all the things, because I'm this witchy girl. And so, yeah, I don't know. It's I'm grateful a lot for it now because in a way I realized I was powerful. Like I just was very powerful and it affected people. And I definitely like made a ripple in what was going on and things. And even though at the time it meant like I was bummed because I was like, I can't hang out with people. And like, I definitely had a lot of insecurity and doubt come up about it. But now looking back, I'm like, that was actually really good for me to realize that I am powerful, and like later in life be able to claim that power. Like I can affect things, absolutely. Um, and I could use my power for good if I want to. No, I do. But I mean, I brought this witchy thing up initially because there's a lure, I think, though, when you feel disempowered, when you feel, when you're coming from abusive situations, when you're a kid and you like things are not good and you want to feel like you can impact things or like people are being mean to you at school and whatever. Like, I do feel like I went into it with more of like a need for feeling powerful when I felt disempowered. It wasn't necessarily like a pure intention in that work. But I think going to the moon hoops showed me like magic actually doesn't have to look like that at all. It actually can look like just prayer. And you're not trying to like enforce your will, which is a lot of what like witchcraft magic talks about, but that actually when you are in a space where you are humble, you are open, you are loving, you are connecting with others, you're sharing what is most true and on your heart, in this collaborative space, like you're all manifesting it together. You're making that magic happen together. And so that was really cool too, to like realize that there's different ways that people can practice spirituality and do magic in the world. And one of them I think is more, I don't want to say pure. I don't really like that kind of language necessarily where it's like, but one has a ease, a simplicity, and a reciprocity with nature, and is not fully dependent on one's will and thus possibly their ego or whatever, their shadow being a part of it.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to go back to your story about like what you were describing. I just wanted to understand the how everything happened chronologically for you. So when you were talking about the studying philosophy, was that something that you were doing in your teenage years, or was that in college?
I was in college. Yeah, my undergrad's in philosophy, and then I also got a master's degree in philosophy.
Oh wow. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I did a program called Philosophy, Cosmology, and Consciousness, and that I would say this is the kind of another layer of my spiritual journey is like, I talked about astrology. Astrology has been such a big part of my life, but I remember being an undergrad at my alma mater, George Mason University, and I used to treat the library like an oracle deck. And I still do it with bookstores. You know what I mean? Like when anytime in my life that I'm like bereft and I just like don't know what to do with myself, there's like two places I've always gone. One is a playground because I'm like, oh, I need to go connect with my inner child. And the other is a bookstore. And I'll just walk around like glazed over, like not even looking for anything. And just like find a book like I would pick a card out of a deck. And it's always been exactly what you know what I mean? It's like just how it works, and so I'm doing this at the library there, and I come upon this tome. It's like this giant book called Cosmos and Psyche. And I'm already like super intrigued. And it's by this Harvard grad historian. It was obviously in the philosophy section. But he was also an astrologer, and he had built his like academic career in philosophy and then kind of like waited till his reputation was kind of on lock. And then he was like, also, here's some astrology, and the whole world was like, what? But this book, I mean, if you ask any like real astrologers, well-read astrologers, like everybody knows this book. This like was probably the most influential book, in my opinion, of like this generation or this century so far. And it's huge. And I like reading that book itself was a mystical experience for me because it like if when people ask like, was there a certain book that changed your life? Like that would be the book that really changed my life. Even if though it wasn't like specifically a spiritual text, but he was going through looking at history and comparing it to these giant, slow astrological ages and things that were going on with the very slow moving outer planets. Sorry, my toddler downstairs is screaming.
Okay.
Shut the door. Hopefully. Okay. I don't know that that did too much for the sound, but anyway, okay. So, he's talking about these like big ages, and he's basically proving astrology in a way that no one ever really had, which is just by actually going and looking at nature, or looking at history, and showing us like, wow, there's these repetitions where every time this particular planetary alignment happens, there's a revolution. Every time this one happens, there's some type of cultural renaissance. There's like these moments, and you could see it from the beginning of civilization to now. And that, it was like a lot clicked for me then. It was like, okay, astrology isn't just about like, who am I going to marry? Or like, why do I like blank or whatever. It was so much more about understanding like whole civilizations, why our timelines have developed the way they have, like, and it made me feel like I actually can see the purpose, like, because that's what I feel like I've been looking for through spirituality, like why, and it was like I could see it unfolding, like purpose happening throughout history. 800. And that really, like, it mystified me completely. And enough that as soon as I, was like on my last year, I was like, I want to go study with this man specifically, and his name's Richard Tarnas. And so, yeah, I applied to this grad school in San Francisco, and I'd only been growing up on the East Coast, had never really spent any time in the Bay Area. And this actually fits in a lot with this, because when I ended up I got accepted to the program, I went out there, and like, he used to be the director at Esalen Institute in Big Sur. And so he was also like really involved in the human potential movement and like psychedelics and all of that as well. So, it was like my first semester in grad school there. And like, we're all at Esalen, like professors and the students, like all taking psychedelics together, bathing in the naked hot springs together. And it was like, definitely was like huge for me, because I'm like, wow, I came from a very different world where it wasn't like quite as acceptable, and like that this was even happening, But I began to see how spirituality at that point didn't have to be this like private thing that I was doing, that it actually, like, when you're in a space of community with people and like have a shared understanding about things, like you can really explore all of these things together, and that was really cool. So.
Cool. And so can you talk more about your astrology and like how that kind of played out in your life? So you said that you started studying it or getting interested in high school, and then
Maybe even younger than that.
Earlier.
Probably younger than that.
So how did that evolve through your life, and how did you come to study it and offer birth chart readings and all of that?
Yeah, sure. Okay. I mean, I always really resonated with it. I was like, I'm an Aries, and my birthday is right around the spring equinox. So even when I didn't know anything but sun sign astrology, like it always resonated with me. And yeah, I remember having like some like young adult books about astrology, and then I remember maybe in high school, there was like Sidney Omar would come up with these like anthology, like every year he would have a book for each of the astrological sun signs. And it was like, tell you about your whole year. And I was like already really into that stuff. And then I started like really looking at birth charts, probably I was in my early 20s, where I started reading people's charts, and I was like so hyped up on what I was finding. I was like, oh my God, like this is like, I have the keys to the universe right now. I was like, I could look at any time in history, any person, like myself. Like, I just felt like, it was just a wealth of insight that was blowing my mind. And I was like, I just wanted to like tell people, I was like, you gotta like, have you seen this? Hello, like you should learn about this. It's crazy. And I wanted to get that across to people, but I was struggling to find the language, because it's all archetypal and it's mythological, and I can hang out in that abstract realm really well, because I'm a philosopher. So like, I can spend all day talking about like, is this real or not, but I know it wasn't that way for a lot of people, especially like my closest friends. They were like, yeah, we get you like astrology. Cool. But I was like, no, like, hold on. I want you to see this. So I remember one year, it was like Christmas, it was about to be Christmas time. And I wanted to make gifts for my friends. And I used to make a lot of jewelry. And I just had this brilliant idea kind of out of nowhere that I was going to make these necklaces for my 3 closest girlfriends that was their birth chart. So I'd use different stones to represent the different signs and the planets. And it would actually be like a miniature model of the solar system at the time they were born. And that way I could like lay it in front of them and be like, look at what we have similar. Oh, but these are different. No, no, no. And we could like look at it, because looking at a chart, I've showed you your chart. It's like, there's a lot of lines and symbols and it can be really overwhelming and just go way over people's heads. And so, yeah, so I did that year. And then all my friends were like, you need to like sell these. So before I ever started actually doing readings for people where I was charging, I was actually just making these necklaces. And I actually had this business going for almost a decade. Eventually I was paying somebody else to make the necklaces for me. And then later they turned into malas, and that was like a whole thing. But it was cool because it gave me a chance to actually look at and study many people's charts, but without the added pressure of like doing a reading for them. Cause that felt really scary for me, because I've also never, I do feel like an intuitive person, but I never wanted to be like, I'm an intuitive, I'm a psychic. Like I didn't fully identify with that. It felt in a way like I was afraid of the ego of that. Like, I know something about you in your life that you don't know. And I'm gonna, but with astrology, it was like, hey, I actually don't know shit. I just read the specific language. And so I'm just going to interpret what this language is saying for you. And you tell me if it resonates. So I liked that because it was more empowering for the person. We could do it more in like a counseling kind of a way. It could be therapeutic, but it also didn't create this hierarchy necessarily where it was like, Sabrina is like super tapped in. She knows all this shit. And like, I don't know. That kind of weirded me out initially. And it felt like a lot of pressure too, to be like, and so, yeah, it was good to get a chance to learn a lot by just doing so many people's charts who were buying all of these necklaces from me. And then I started doing like little write-ups, like that you would buy the necklace and you could get like a little write-up about it, whatever, and then eventually, I don't know, maybe I'm like 24, 25 or something, where I started reading charts for people. And it was just it was a hobby on the side, a little bit extra money, and it wasn't until so it was right before my 30th birthday that I got divorced. I separated with my ex-husband and I started traveling, and I left the DC area like for good. I left to go to grad school and I came back because I was married. But yeah, I was like kind of just free roaming around. And so I just used astrology, and I also studied massage. So I was like just using astrology and massage as like my means of income as I was like doing the nomad life, and that was cool because then I really delved into it very deeply. As a career, like I had already been studying it, if you wanted to know more about kind of how I got into it, like before I went to that grad school program, I had also found an online school of astrology. I think I've told you about it, the International Academy of Astrology. So I went through their program. A lot of astrologers don't do that. I mean, now there's more options available, but astrologers really have always been self-taught based on books, And so I had read a lot of astrology books, but I do kind of like formal structured learning environments. And I felt like I had gaps. Like I felt like there was just things I didn't understand, and I wanted something comprehensive. And that was really helpful for me. So yeah. I mean, and kind of ever since then, it's been a big part of my life. I'm not, it's such a part of my life that I'm not overly reliant on it. I think that sometimes when you're early on in your astrology journey, you're like checking the charts every day and like looking at like you can just kind of get into it so deeply. And there's a degree to which that can become unhealthy for people. And so I kind of had to have my own like relationship with that. So now it's like, sometimes I know exactly what's going on currently. Usually if I'm doing someone's chart and I'm paying attention to it that way, or I'm looking at like big things that are happening, but I'm not like hyper obsessed about my own chart or whatever, like even just today, actually today was the first time I've really looked at my own chart in a while, because I was trying to look it under a certain lens. I was like asking myself a question about rebranding my business. And I was like, the answer is just going to be in my chart, like, because it's just me, So that was cool. I actually had like a couple really cool aha moments today. Like there's always so much more you can see than you think. Like it just keeps going. But just like any kind of oracular tool, any kind of divination, it can be empowering or it can be disempowering depending on how you use it, or if it becomes like a crutch for you, And so, yeah, I feel like I've just developed a relationship with that where I'm not codependent on it, I guess is what I'll say.
Mhm.
I think that I've been in that world enough that I feel like I have a really healthy relationship with that.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
And what about the work that you're doing now? How did you get into womb healing, and how does that fit into the picture of your life?
I'm glad you're asking me this now because in many ways I feel like I'm not necessarily stepping out of that work, but I do feel like I'm shifting right now in my life. I got into it because of my own health journey, which once again can be seen as a spiritual journey, right? Like I feel like a lot of spiritual initiations for people, especially in indigenous cultures, it's like they like went they died and came back or had like a near death experience or like, I mean, that's, I think a lot of people find spirituality through near death experiences. Mine was not that serious. I didn't have a near death experience, but I was ill. And so that's how I found, I think, mm, that's what got me really connected to earth. I think I really connected to food and herbs
Mm.
and like, oh, like not just everything is magical around me, but it's also medicine. Like it's also meant to heal me. And like I'm never in my illness too far from the remedy or the cure that's like right here. I just need to like know what I'm looking for and like commune with nature to find it. So I was able to naturally heal myself of polycystic ovarian syndrome through just studying plant medicine and studying nutrition. And that's what I ended up going to school after my philosophy program. I got another master's in health coaching. And then, it's interesting because I was like, I'm just going to be an astrologer. Like, that's what I want to do. But this women's work just kept kind of hitting me in the face. It was like everywhere I went, like that time that I was traveling, like I was saying to you, everywhere that I went, I was like, yeah, I'm doing readings for people. But it was like every woman I was talking to was dealing with hormone issues, womb issues, had just had a miscarriage, there were so many things. And like I realized at that point, like I actually had a wealth of knowledge at this point around those things. And I was like, what are you doing about it? And it was like, oh my gynecologist said get on birth control, or like I have to have a hysterectomy, or like, I don't know, what do you do? And I was like, shit, like I guess this is a moment where I have something to teach and share. So it wasn't so much like I felt like I was like, I want to be a womb healer. Like I wanted to be an astrologer, really. Like I just kept feeling like that's what was needed because everywhere I went, I was with women and women have women's stuff and they needed support. And like it just wasn't fair. So that's what got me on that journey as like a career path, was just showing up and doing what I felt like was needed. Um, and I've been doing that for like, I don't know. I mean, in some form or another, over a decade now. Well, maybe it's been about a decade. I graduated at uh 27, 28 from my second master's program, and I'm 37 now. So yeah. And I started coaching like right away. Um, but it's interesting because I do feel like right now I'm feeling called to do more spiritual work, which is why I think this is just so perfect. Like I think when I decided I was going to be an entrepreneur and I was going to do coaching work, I sort of felt like I have to be taken seriously, right? Like I was still living in DC when I started coaching. And so I started working at like an integrative medical center. And so I kind of said like, all right, some of my woo woo stuff, I sort of have to put on the back burner because I'm young. No one's going to take me seriously. I need to be taken seriously. So I was like, I'm just going to like show up with the science. I'm like, let's talk biochemistry. Like, let's talk, and I love that stuff too. But it was like, I really like put that foot forward because I thought that's what was going to be necessary for me to be able to build a business where people saw me, like, cause I didn't become a doctor and I didn't become a naturopath. I became a health coach. And so I was like, but I wanted to feel like an authority in it and I wanted to be seen that way. And so I didn't feel like I could just like, and whether or not this is true or not, this is just the story I was telling myself. It was like, I can't really do astrology right now as my main thing. I need to like not talk about that so much on my social media. I need to like kind of set all that aside so that I can just do this work. And like what I told you today about looking at my chart today, I'm like, yeah, but also like, I'm actually really here to be a mentor in the spiritual realm. Like for sure. Like, and not just spirit, like, cause me, I don't even see it separate from physical. In many ways, if I really like, cause I've been honing in on like, what's my new brand message or whatever. I mean, really what it is I teach people how to align with cosmic cycles, which are already happening. Like we're all part of it. You know what I mean? It's already happening. But if we have an awareness of it, if we're conscious of it, we can co-create with that. And then how to take that and really ground it into our physical bodies, into how we actually live and engage in the world in a strategic, practical, embodied way. And I think my womb work was all part of like getting me into a place where I was really trusting my body. And so I think that's kind of what I'm doing right now. Is like, I don't want it, it's not like super ethereal. It's not like, oh, I'm just like out here on the stars all the time. Like, I'm not really that kind of person. I'm like, cool, let's go get what we need to know from that. And then let's figure out how to like feel it here and like live it in this way. So I would say that's kind of what I'm transitioning into now more, is doing mentorship work that is astrological, that is alchemical with women. And I think specifically, I feel really called to work with other entrepreneurs, because I feel like we're shifting the paradigms. We're breaking out of the whole 9-to-5 thing. We're like freeing ourselves from slavery, really. We are becoming sovereign. And I want to support women in getting really clear on like doing their work here, you know? So that's exciting to me. I feel like it gives me something really to look forward to with my work. And I'm pretty stoked about it, honestly.
Beautiful. I just want to reflect a couple of things back to you. One is that it sounds like, your womb work is part of that, right? Like that cyclical nature of the universe and the cosmos. And it's like part of that. So you could, even continue to offer that as part of your bigger umbrella work. And also from hearing you talk about your story and your life, it sounds like you've had a really spirit-led life, like these things, like you mentioned, being kind of just called to, just observing what's coming to you in your reality and going, moving forward based on that, kind of what's being offered to you and what people are needing. I wanted to say that I really like that about what you're sharing, because it sounds like you're just going with the flow. Is so cliche to say, but like just picking up what people are putting in front of you. And yeah.
I mean, I think thank you for saying, I appreciate that. I feel like I'm a generator, right? So I'm like responding, I think, to the moment, and I feel like I'm just ready. There's like a part of me that's like ready to serve, but I need to wait until there's clarity. And often the clarity comes from a response to an external need or something that is like bringing it forward, So even like with this transition with my brand, like I was super busy with clients last year. It was actually one of the best years I think I've ever had in my business. I'd launched a couple different programs. I was like teaching other younger women about the science behind hormone health and womb healing. And so at that time, I would never have imagined I'd be doing this kind of like pivot right now. But this year, I really haven't, like, it's kind of been slow trucking on that front for me. And that's like when things are not flowing, they're not aligning. It just made me go like, okay, maybe something else is wanting to happen. And then all of a sudden, kind of out of nowhere, I have some like recurring astrology clients that I've had for years. Like every year they hit me up, I do readings, and she referred me to someone. This guy like wanted to like hire me as like an ongoing coach with him. Then he referred me, he's giving me a lot of referrals. So all of a sudden in the background of doing all of this astrology again, kind of like, I'm not advertising, it's just kind of falling into my lap. So that's just what I'm speaking to, this whole like, okay, seeing what's needed. Like that's what the shift happened, because I was seeing it happen. And I was like, okay, universe, you're talking to me again. Got it. Okay. Like I'm going to get the message. Let me do what I need to do to like be in alignment with this, because ultimately what I'm doing here is I'm just here to serve, and I'm not, it's not even necessarily coming from me. I'm just channeling what I feel like needs to come through, even though it looks like a genuine offering for me, because it is on some, in some level of reality, it absolutely is. But if we're talking in the big scale and the cosmic about it, there's a deeper purpose that goes beyond what I'm even able to see. The ripple effect goes so much further than what I have any conscious awareness of in the choices that I'm making, but I know that that's true. So I will move when it's time to move,
Yeah. And even I came to you recently and asked about astrology and even mentorship. So that's really crazy that all happened. Yeah.
I've had 2 other people ask me if I would like do an astrology course and like teach about it. So yeah, like I'm definitely responding to those things. Hi. Yes, my baby's been away for too long. Baby.
Good baby. Hi. Oh, hi.
I don't know what's going on.
Well, we'll wrap up here pretty soon, but one other thing that I wanted to ask you about was your podcast, because you had an astrology podcast at one point, right?
Yeah, me and my friend Stephanie. She also was living in Humboldt and also an astrologer. And oh my God, yeah, she went to the same grad school I did, but it did a different program. I think she's a practicing psychologist now. But we, when astrologers get together, it's like, because we speak this other language that we wish everybody would speak, and so you just geek out on it. And so we had this like immediate just connection, and actually we started hanging out together because I was helping her with her womb health. So we actually like developed a relationship through that work. And she ended up getting pregnant, which is what she wanted. It was all really beautiful. But yeah, we started a podcast. I mean, it's probably still out there in the ether realms, but it's My Alchemical Romance, actually, is what we called it. And we did like monthly, talks about what was going on in the upcoming astrology. And, honestly, that it never got big or anything, which wasn't really the intention, but it was definitely like listened to by all of our friends locally, and people really liked it. And so I had a lot of friends that were sad when I stopped doing it. I'm not like, I don't really want to do a lot of horoscopes. Like that was the one thing I think that has made me hesitate about like being a professional astrologer, was like, do I have to do that? Because it just seems like that's just a thing that astrologers have to do, right? You just have to do horoscopes. And like maybe to some degree, but I didn't want to have to do a lot of horoscopes. I really enjoy like the one-on-one deep diving with people, I think it's more impactful. People think it's cool. They're like, I just want to hear a quick little blip about what my week's going to be like. And I'm like, that's fine. I get it. I did the same thing too. But I'm like, but if you really want to like astrology can be used in so many ways, and I just think that it can be so much more impactful when it's like done in this like really held sacred container and like privacy with a person, with their story and what they're dealing with, that kind of like deeper kind of counseling astrology. So yeah, I don't know. I'm like, I do have a current podcast now called the Womb Alchemy Podcast, which I'm going to keep, but I'm going to expand kind of the different topics we are going to talk about on it. But I'm going to keep it, and I was thinking I have some other people on, that I want to have on that do some astrological stuff. So yeah, that's still available. That's definitely something you can check out.
Cool. Very cool. Well, I'm sure I could ask you a bunch more questions and get some more juicy answers out of you, but I know your little one needs you now, so I'll let you go.
This has been beautiful though. I've been just great. I mean, thank you for giving me an opportunity to do some like reflection actually on my life and on my spiritual journey. And I'll say even now, like maybe just the last piece is like, obviously that journey never ends. Motherhood has been an entirely new dimension of expanding my understanding of the spiritual journey, pregnancy, birth, all of that. So, we didn't get into all that. We were just trying to talk about where it started, but that it never ends. There's just so many different and deeper layers. And I think staying in a place of openness and curiosity and humbleness, I think is really important to having a successful life, really, but to continuing to allow your spirituality to unfold. Because the moment you think you really know something, like life's going to show you how little you actually know. So I think it's better to be in a space of like awe and just amazement that there's just so many new dimensions that you get to discover, as you grow and as you step into different roles like motherhood. I'm sure you can relate, so yeah.
Yes, we are students of the universe for sure. Well, those are beautiful words to end on, and maybe someday we'll have a Sabrina round 2 so you can share more about your spirituality through motherhood and all of that. And
yeah, maybe. That would be awesome. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. It was really fun to talk with you.
Good to talk to you too, Amelia. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Speaking of Spirituality. If you'd like to connect with me personally or book a session for Quantum Soul Alchemy, you can find me on Instagram at Ascending with Amelia. Have a beautiful day.